Why did the rifle feel heavier than it should have when she lifted it from the rack? Not because of its weight. She'd carried heavier things through worse terrain. It was the silence that pressed down on her chest, the sudden awareness that every eye on the range had turned toward her, measuring, judging, dismissing. Maya Rodriguez felt it before she heard it, that familiar tightening behind the ribs, the quiet warning that the world was about to remind her where it thought she belonged. She told herself she wouldn't touch it, not today, not ever if she could help it. The clipboard in her left hand still smelled faintly of ink and carbon paper. Inventory duty, safe, invisible, but the wind had shifted, kicking dust across the Nevada range, blurring the far targets into wavering ghosts. The M40 sat there unused, its scope catching the sun like an unblinking eye. Something old and disciplined inside her recognized the conditions, calculated them, adjusted without asking permission. The voice came sharp and loud, slicing through the range noise like a blade. "Where the hell did you get that rifle?" Staff Sergeant Pierce's words carried years of authority and a confidence built on never being questioned. Maya didn't look at him right away. She knew that voice. The kind that assumed its place in the world was earned and permanent. She set the clipboard down carefully as if it mattered, as if order still applied. She wasn't supposed to be here. Everyone knew that. Her file said supply technician. No sniper tab, no marksmanship ribbon worth mentioning. Her value existed in spreadsheets and serial numbers. Soldiers spoke to her like you spoke to furniture, only when you needed something, never expecting a response with weight. Laughter rippled behind Pierce. She heard the words but didn't let them land. She trained herself not to. Mockery was loud but shallow. It passed quickly if you didn't feed it. "Supply girl wants to play soldier," someone said. Maya knelt anyway. The ground was hot through her fatigues. She welcomed it. Physical sensation anchored her. The rifle came into her hands like a memory she hadn't visited in years. Familiar, precise. She checked the bolt, the chamber, the scope alignment. Her fingers moved without hurry, not to prove anything, just to be correct. Pierce gave her 30 seconds. A mercy, he probably thought. She didn't answer him. She never did when the truth would only complicate things. Instead, she settled into position, letting the noise fade. The range didn't disappear, it narrowed. Breath, pulse, wind, distance. 750 yards shimmered like a lie. Her first shot cut clean through the afternoon. Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the stunned kind. The kind that waits for reality to catch up. She fired twice more. The grouping spoke for her. Maya cleared the rifle and stood, already feeling the familiar urge to shrink back into anonymity. That was when the boots approached, slower, heavier, command without effort. Colonel Williams stopped like he'd walked into a memory. His question wasn't angry, it was haunted. "Where did you get that rifle?" Maya met his eyes. She saw it then, the recognition he hadn't meant to show, the crack in his composure. He knew, or he suspected. Either way, it wasn't something he could say out loud. Some missions never happened. She returned to her clipboard, walked away before anyone could ask the wrong question. And as she did, the base around her began to change in ways no one could yet explain. Why did the silence follow her after that day, heavier than the rifle ever had? Maya noticed it in the hallways first. Conversations dipped when she passed. Not fear exactly, something closer to uncertainty. Respect born not from rank but from confusion. Soldiers didn't know how to categorize her anymore, and that made them careful. She preferred it this way. Anonymity had always been her armor, long before Fort Blackstone, long before supply logs and borrowed invisibility. She learned early that being unseen was safer than being admired. Admiration invited questions. Questions led to records. Records got people killed. At night, when the barracks settled into a low mechanical hum, the memories crept in anyway. Mountains, thin air, radios crackling with panic. A spotter's voice cut short mid-sentence. wind she could taste in her mouth, the impossible math of distance and consequence. She remembered the faces she never saw clearly, only silhouettes through thermal scope, threats neutralized before they became names. She remembered the count, 9 confirmed, though numbers never told the whole truth. They never mentioned the 42 men who went home alive because of it. They never mentioned the price she paid afterward. She'd been younger then, not reckless but certain, certain that precision justified everything. The program didn't argue, it simply erased her. After Afghanistan, they'd offered her a choice disguised as orders: disappear completely or disappear quietly. Maya chose the second: supply duty, stateside, no questions, no rifles. Until the wind shifted. Colonel Williams didn't call her in. That mattered. If he had, things would have escalated fast. Instead, he watched, carefully, as if one wrong move might shatter whatever fragile agreement existed between them. Pierce avoided her. The others didn't know how to speak to her anymore. A few tried awkward questions, half jokes, but Maya deflected them gently. She wasn't cruel, she just didn't belong to them. What unsettled her wasn't exposure. It was the pull she felt again. The quiet part of her that missed clarity, missed purpose, that came without meetings or paperwork. A shot taken for the right reason was simple, brutal but simple. Weeks passed. Then the alert came. Not official, not loud, just a name on a requisition request she wasn't supposed to recognize. A unit rotating through familiar terrain, mountains again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself many things. Why did the past feel closer than the present when the call finally came? It wasn't from command. It was from someone who knew how to bypass systems, a voice she recognized without needing a name. Calm, direct, unapologetic. We need eyes that don't miss. Maya closed her eyes. The conflict rose immediately, sharp and familiar. She promised herself she was done. That supply duty was a penance she'd earned. That silence was enough. But somewhere out there, people were about to depend on precision again. And she knew what happened when no one like her answered. She didn't ask about clearance, didn't ask about legality. Those details had never protected anyone she cared about. She packed light. The rifle waited in its case like it had never been set down. The mission unfolded slowly. No heroics, no speeches, just long hours of watching and waiting. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were heavier than they used to be. Every shot carried weight now, not just consequence but memory. She hesitated once. That was new. The hesitation didn't cost anyone their life, but it reminded her she was human again, not a tool, not a ghost. When it was over, she left the same way she arrived, quietly. No debrief worth recording, no medals, just a nod from someone who understood what restraint cost. Back at Fort Blackstone, nothing looked different. That mattered too. Why did redemption feel quieter than guilt? Maya returned to her desk, to forms and serial numbers, to being ignored, and she welcomed it. She wasn't trying to disappear anymore. She simply understood that some strength worked best without witnesses. Occasionally, she caught someone watching her with a mix of curiosity and respect. She didn't acknowledge it. Respect earned from mystery wasn't something you could control. Colonel Williams passed her once in the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't salute, just met her eyes briefly and inclined his head. It was enough. At night, she slept better. Not because the memories were gone, but because they no longer owned her. She learned something in the years between the shots. That precision without purpose was hollow. That dignity didn't demand recognition. It revealed itself in restraint. Maya Rodriguez stayed exactly where she was supposed to be. And when the world needed her again, she would act. Quietly, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier after the shots than before them? Maya felt it trailing her as she walked away from the range, a pressure between her shoulder blades, as if something unseen had stepped in behind her and decided to stay. The desert wind still howled. The targets still reset themselves with mechanical indifference, but the energy had shifted. She didn't need to look back to know that Fort Blackstone would never see her the same way again. She kept her pace even, not fast, not defiant, just controlled, the way she'd been trained to move when attention was dangerous. The clipboard was back in her hands, its familiar weight grounding her. Numbers, serial codes, checkboxes. She focused on them like a lifeline, but the calm they used to bring didn't come. Her pulse was still too steady, too ready. That unsettled her more than fear ever had. Inside the admin building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of paper, toner, and burnt coffee wrapped around her like a dull blanket. Normally, this was where she disappeared, where no one noticed her unless something was missing. Today, heads lifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A lieutenant she'd passed 100 times without a glance suddenly stood straighter, unsure whether to acknowledge her or pretend he hadn't seen her at all. Maya chose neither. She walked on. At her desk, she sat and logged the final range numbers with deliberate care. Each keystroke measured, each breath counted. This was her ritual after exposure. Reassert control. Remind herself that she still belonged to the ordinary world. But ordinary had a way of slipping when you weren't looking. Her mind drifted despite her efforts, not to the range, but further back, to places the desert sun couldn't reach. Thin air burned her lungs as she crawled across shale. The smell of cordite mixed with cold stone. A radio crackled, then screamed, then went dead. She remembered the sound of her own breathing inside the scope headset, calm to the point of cruelty. She remembered how easy it had felt to make the decision back then. She blinked hard, forcing the memory down. She was good at that. She had to be. A shadow fell across her desk. Specialist Rodriguez. The voice was careful, not sharp like Pierce. Controlled, professional. She looked up to see Captain Elaine Foster standing there, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Intelligence liaison. Maya recognized the type instantly, the kind of officer who asked questions without ever sounding like they were asking. "Yes, ma'am." Captain Foster glanced at the screen, then back to Maya's face. "Colonel Williams would like a word when you're finished." It wasn't a request. Maya nodded once. "I'll finish this log." Foster hesitated, as if weighing whether to push. Then she turned and left without another word. Maya sat there for a long moment after her footsteps faded. This was the moment she'd hoped wouldn't come. Not because she was afraid of consequences, but because consequences meant visibility. And visibility was how people like her stopped surviving. She finished the log anyway. Sloppy work had no place in her life. Not now, not ever. The colonel's office was quiet in the way power rooms often were. Soundproofed. Controlled. The walls held framed maps instead of medals. That told her more than any ribbon display could have. Colonel Williams stood by the window when she entered, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn right away. He didn't need to. He already knew she was there. "Close the door," he said. She did. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was respectful. That unsettled her more than interrogation ever would have. "I didn't plan to call you in," Williams said finally. "But pretending I didn't see what I saw would be dishonest." Maya kept her eyes forward. "Sir." He turned then, really looked at her, not the file, not the uniform, her. "You know why your name disappeared from the system," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "You know how rare that is." "Yes, sir." Williams exhaled slowly. "You also know what it means if someone higher than me decides to ask why." Maya nodded. This was the unspoken rule. Ghosts only stayed ghosts if no one tugged the sheet. "I'm not here to expose you," he continued. I'm here to understand why you broke cover. The question hung between them like a live wire. Maya considered her answer carefully. Truth was dangerous, but lies were worse. The conditions were wrong, she said finally. Wind, heat, distance. Someone was going to get hurt trying to impress someone else. William studied her. So you intervened? Yes, sir. Without orders? Yes, sir. A faint smile touched his mouth. Not amusement, recognition. That hasn't changed then. No, sir. He walked back to his desk and sat. For the first time he looked tired, older than his rank suggested. There are people who still talk about that day in the mountains, he said. Not officially, not in reports, but in quiet moments. They talk about a wind that cut through the chaos and made sense of it. Maya said nothing. I won't ask you to explain yourself, he continued. And I won't pretend this conversation didn't happen, but understand this. Your presence here is tolerated because it's quiet, useful. The moment it becomes something else. I understand, she said softly. Williams nodded. Good, dismissed. She stood, saluted, and left without another word. Back in the hallway, her legs felt heavier. Not weak, weighted, like gravity had increased slightly, just enough to be noticed. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the base settling into night. Laughter in the distance. A door slamming. Boots on concrete. Life continuing without her. Her hands twitched once involuntarily. Muscle memory, a ghost of recoil. She wondered, for the first time in years, if disappearing had been an act of cowardice disguised as humility. If hiding had been easier than living with what she was capable of. The thought unsettled her. In the days that followed, rumors thickened. Not loud ones, subtle ones. Whispers that died when she entered a room. Questions that were never asked directly. Pierce avoided eye contact now. Thompson barely spoke at all. Maya moved through it untouched on the surface, but inside, something had shifted. A crack in the wall she'd built so carefully. She began to notice small things. A requisition request routed past her desk twice. A training schedule adjusted without explanation. Names she recognized from old operations appearing in logistics chains they shouldn't have touched. The world she'd stepped away from hadn't forgotten her. And deep down, beneath the discipline and restraint, a question began to form. Quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. What if silence wasn't enough anymore? She didn't know the answer yet. But she suspected the world was about to ask her anyway. Why did the smallest detail feel louder than any gunshot she'd ever fired? It was a shipping code. Maya stared at the screen longer than she should have. The numbers were ordinary to anyone else, just another alphanumeric string buried in a logistics request, but to her, they rang like a bell in a silent room. She hadn't seen that prefix in years, not since before she'd been erased, not since the world had decided it was safer if people like her didn't officially exist. She didn't move at first. Training taught you to pause when something felt wrong. Rushing got people killed. She copied the code onto a scrap of paper, folded it once, and slid it into her pocket as if it were nothing more than a reminder to reorder toner. Her heart rate never changed. That was the part that scared her. Around her, Fort Blackstone moved through another unremarkable afternoon. Phones rang. Printers jammed. Someone complained loudly about missing paperwork. The mundane rhythm of base life carried on, indifferent to the fact that something buried and dangerous had just brushed past her. Maya finished her shift on time. No deviations, no mistakes. If someone was watching, and she was certain someone was, they'd see nothing but a supply technician doing her job. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, the desert swallowing the sun in layers of purple and rust. She walked instead of taking the shuttle, letting the cool air scrape against her skin. Movement helped her think. The code meant one of two things. Either someone was sloppy, and that was unlikely, or someone wanted to be noticed. Both possibilities carried weight. In her quarters, she locked the door and sat on the edge of her bunk without turning on the light. She pulled the paper from her pocket and unfolded it slowly. Her memory filled in the blanks her eyes didn't need to confirm. That code belonged to a compartmentalized logistics stream used only for personnel who didn't exist on paper, assets that moved without trails, weapons that never appeared on manifests, the kind of infrastructure built for emergencies no one was supposed to talk about. She closed her eyes. She told herself she was done with that world, that she'd paid whatever debt she owed, but debts like hers didn't stay settled. They waited. The knock came just after midnight. Not loud, not urgent, 3 measured taps, professional. Maya didn't reach for anything. She didn't need to. She moved to the door and opened it without hesitation. The woman standing there wore civilian clothes, but nothing about her was civilian. Her posture was relaxed in a way that came only from confidence earned the hard way. Late 30s, sharp eyes, no visible weapon, which meant there was one. "May I come in?" the woman asked. Maya stepped aside. The woman took in the room with a single glance, exits, angles, shadows. She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. "My name is Rachel Hale," she said, "at least for tonight." Maya said nothing. Hale smiled faintly. "You're harder to find than your file suggests." That was the point. Yes, Hale agreed. It usually is. She didn't waste time. Professionals rarely did. "There's a unit operating without overwatch," Hale said. "Bad terrain, worse intel. They don't know they're walking into a problem that's already cost lives." Maya folded her arms. "Then they should abort." "They can't." "Then send someone else." Hale's gaze didn't waver. "We did," they missed. The word landed heavier than it should have. Maya turned away, staring at the blank wall. She felt the familiar conflict rise, sharp, insistent. This was how it always started, not with orders, with necessity, with someone else's mistake becoming her responsibility. "I'm not cleared," she said quietly. "You're overcleared," Hale replied. "You always were." Maya let out a slow breath. "I'm not who you think I am anymore." Hale stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You never stopped being who you are. You just stopped being used." That hit closer than Maya wanted to admit. Silence stretched between them. In that silence lived every shot she'd ever taken, every face she'd never seen clearly, every justification she'd rehearsed to survive herself. "What's the objective?" Maya asked finally. Hale didn't answer right away. That hesitation told Maya everything. "Extraction," Hale said, "but it won't stay that way." Maya nodded. She understood. Objectives shifted. They always did. "When?" she asked. 6 hours. Maya closed her eyes. 6 hours to decide whether she would cross a line she'd spent years backing away from. Hale watched her carefully. "No one will force you." "No one ever does," Maya said. After Hale left, Maya sat alone in the dark. She didn't pack immediately. That would have meant she'd already chosen. Instead, she thought about the day she'd disappeared, how relieved she'd felt when the paperwork went through, how she'd convinced herself that survival was enough. She thought about the men in the mountains who'd never known her name, but had lived because of her restraint. She thought about the hesitation she'd felt on her last mission, and how it hadn't been weakness. It had been humanity. When she finally stood, her decision felt heavy but clear. She packed light. The transport was quiet. No insignia, no conversation. Hale sat across from her, reviewing data Maya already knew would be incomplete. "Why now?" Maya asked as the desert blurred past the window. Hale didn't look up. "Because people like you only get called when the margin for error is gone." They landed before dawn. The terrain was worse than expected. Mountains rose like broken teeth against the horizon. Wind cut through layers. Visibility shifted without warning. Maya felt her body adjust automatically, breathing, balance, awareness snapping into alignment like she'd never left. The unit met them with guarded looks. They recognized Hale. They didn't recognize Maya. "Who's she?" someone asked. "Support," Hale said. Maya almost smiled. She moved into position quietly. No ceremony, no announcement. She checked angles, wind, distance. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. Not fear, responsibility. The first shot wasn't hers. The sound cracked too close, too uncontrolled. Maya swore under her breath. She took over without asking permission. Her scope found movement where others saw chaos. She tracked patiently, waiting not for the perfect shot but the necessary one. When she fired, it was clean. The unit didn't cheer, they just breathed again. Minutes stretched, threats dissolved. The extraction shifted just as Hale had warned. Maya adapted without thought but with care. Every decision carried weight now, not just tactical but personal. When it was over, dawn broke quietly over the mountains. No one thanked her directly. They didn't need to. The look said enough. On the flight back, Hale finally spoke. "You hesitated," she said. "Yes," Maya replied. And I still acted." Hale nodded. "That's why we called you." Back at Fort Blackstone, Maya returned to her desk like nothing had happened. But she knew better now. Silence wasn't retreat. It was preparation. And somewhere between who she had been and who she was trying to become, Maya understood something she'd never allowed herself to before. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing, every time, what you did with it. Why did coming back feel harder than leaving ever had? Maya noticed it the moment her boots touched the tarmac at Fort Blackstone. Nothing looked different. Same low buildings, same guarded quiet, same routines stitched together by discipline and habit. But she felt out of step, like her internal clock had shifted and the world hadn't bothered to catch up. She signed in, logged her return time, accepted a cup of burnt coffee she didn't want. No one asked where she'd been. No one ever did when the absence was short enough to explain away and quiet enough to avoid paperwork. That was how the system protected itself from curiosity. Still, eyes followed her more than before. Not openly, not accusingly, just long enough to register that she had returned unchanged on the surface, while something underneath had settled into a deeper, heavier place. At her desk, she opened the same inventory software. The familiar glow of the monitor should have grounded her. Instead, her reflection stared back faintly from the glass, older than she remembered. Not in years, in weight. She typed, stopped, deleted a line that didn't need deleting. Her hands were steady, but her mind was. The mission replayed in fragments. Not the shots, that part was clean. It was the faces afterward. The way one of the soldiers had looked at her when he realized she'd taken control without raising her voice. Not awe, relief. The kind that came from knowing someone competent was watching the angles you couldn't see. She missed that feeling more than she wanted to admit. By midday, the base had adjusted to her presence again. Humans were good at that. Even mystery lost its edge when it became familiar. The rumors softened. The whispers faded into background noise. Routine reclaimed its territory. But Colonel Williams hadn't forgotten. He waited until the afternoon slowed, until the corridors thinned and the day's urgency dulled. Then he appeared at the edge of her workspace without announcing himself. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. They moved through the base side by side, neither setting the pace faster than necessary. Williams didn't look at her at first. He watched the ground ahead like a man counting steps he'd walked too many times. "You didn't file anything," he said eventually. "No, sir. I didn't expect you to." That was both reassurance and warning. They stopped near the edge of the training fields, where the desert stretched out indifferent and vast. Wind tugged at William's uniform. He turned to face her fully now. "You understand that every time you step back into that world," he said, "you make it harder to stay out of it." Maya nodded, "Yes, sir." "And yet you keep stepping back." "Yes, sir." William studied her for a long moment. Why? The question wasn't accusatory. It was tired, curious, human. Maya considered lying. She was good at it. But something about the quiet, about the space he'd given her, made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. "Because if I don't," she said carefully, "someone else pays for it." Williams exhaled. "That's a heavy way to live." "It's familiar." He nodded slowly. "Familiar doesn't mean sustainable." "No, sir." They stood there in silence, the wind filling the space where answers should have been. "You're not a weapon," Williams said finally, "no matter how many people treat you like one." Maya felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, recognition. "I know," she said. "That's why I choose when to be used." Williams gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Just make sure you're choosing for yourself, not out of habit." He left her there with that thought. That night, Maya sat alone on the steps outside her barracks, watching the sky shift through colors the desert always seemed to invent just for itself. She wrapped her arms around her knees, feeling the quiet settle. She thought about choice. For years, she'd told herself she stayed invisible because it was safer. That was only half true. The other half was harder to face. Staying invisible meant she didn't have to reconcile the two versions of herself, the one who counted bullets and the one who decided where they landed. The mission had reopened a door she'd spent years reinforcing, not violently, gently, as if asking permission. Days passed without incident, then weeks. Maya began to believe, cautiously, that balance might actually be possible. She trained quietly again, nothing official, early mornings, late nights, dry fire drills in the privacy of spaces no one checked, not because she expected to be called, but because neglect felt like disrespect, to herself, to the skill, to the lives tied to both. One evening, as she packed up, a young private lingered nearby. He shifted his weight, clearly working up the nerve to speak. "Specialist Rodriguez," he said finally. "Yes. I just wanted to say thanks for the range that day." Maya studied him, nervous, earnest, too young to know how quickly confidence could turn into tragedy. "For what?" she asked. "For reminding us," he said, "that being quiet doesn't mean being weak." Maya felt the words settle somewhere deep. She nodded once. "You're welcome." After he left, she sat there longer than necessary, staring at the floor. The next call didn't come from Hale. It came through a channel she'd never expected to hear from again. Higher clearance, shorter words, less room to refuse. The situation was worse this time, not tactically, politically. A failed operation layered with bad assumptions, civilians too close, decisions already made that couldn't be undone. They didn't ask her to pull a trigger. They asked her to observe, to advise, to be present where restraint mattered more than action. Maya almost laughed at the irony. The deployment was brief but tense. She stood behind glass and screens, watching events unfold with the clarity distance provided and the helplessness it enforced. She spoke only when necessary. When she did, people listened. Not because of rank, because she didn't speak often. One moment stayed with her. A junior officer, hand hovering over an order that would have escalated things beyond recovery. His voice had shaken when he asked her opinion. Maya had paused, not from doubt, from respect for the weight of it. "Wait," she'd said, just that, one word. He waited. Lives bent around that pause. When it was over, when the fallout settled into reports and statements and quiet relief, Maya felt something she hadn't in years. Not pride. Alignment. Back at Fort Blackstone, she resumed her routines. But something subtle had changed in how she moved through the world. She no longer felt like she was hiding. She was choosing her scale. Colonel Williams noticed. He always did. "You're not disappearing anymore," he said one afternoon. "No, sir." "Good," he replied. "The right people don't vanish. They decide when to be seen." That night, Maya lay awake thinking about the line between restraint and avoidance, between humility and fear. She realized she'd spent years confusing them. Strength, she understood now, wasn't about action or silence. It was about discernment, about knowing when to step forward and when not to. The rifle was still locked away. So was the clipboard. Neither defined her. And for the first time since she'd been erased, Maya felt something steady settle in her chest. Not peace. Purpose. Quiet, intentional, earned. Why did the moment she feared most arrive without warning? Maya was reviewing a shipment manifest when the alarms didn't sound. That was the first sign something was wrong. No sirens, no hurried footsteps in the corridor, just a subtle interruption in the base's rhythm like a skipped heartbeat, the kind you didn't notice unless you were listening for it. Her screen froze, not a crash, just a pause. Then a single message appeared where the inventory totals should have been. "Stand by, do not move." No sender, no signature. Maya leaned back slowly, letting her breathing settle. This wasn't an emergency drill. Drills were loud by design. This was containment. She stood, hands visible, and waited. Minutes passed before the door opened. Two people entered, both in civilian clothes, both carrying themselves with the quiet authority of those who didn't need uniforms to be obeyed. She recognized one immediately. Rachel Hale didn't smile this time. "We need you," Hale said, skipping every pretense. "Now." Maya nodded once. "What happened?" Hale exchanged a glance with the man beside her, then answered carefully. "Someone made a decision based on incomplete information. It's about to cost more than it already has." Maya felt the familiar weight settle in her chest. Not adrenaline, responsibility. They moved her through corridors she'd never walked before, past doors that didn't exist on base maps. The room they entered was small, windowless, and humming with restrained urgency. Screens lined one wall. Faces stared back, some tense, some angry, some afraid. Colonel Williams was there. He met Maya's eyes, and in that look was something she'd never seen from him before. "Regret. We should have pulled you in earlier," he said. Maya didn't respond. She took in the screens instead. Live feeds, urban terrain this time, narrow streets, civilians everywhere. A unit boxed in by mistake stacked too neatly to be accidental. "They think this is a show of force," Hale said. "It is." Maya studied the map overlays, the angles, the choke points. She saw it immediately, the problem no one wanted to name. "They're being baited," she said quietly. Silence followed, not because they disagreed, because they just realized she was right. The room shifted, chairs turned, attention focused. Maya felt the pull again, that subtle pressure to take control. She resisted it at first. This wasn't her operation. She was here to advise. "Who made the call to advance?" she asked. No one answered. That told her enough. "They don't need more movement," she said. "They need patience." One of the officers bristled. "We're already compromised." "Yes," Maya replied calmly, "but not yet defeated. Those aren't the same." She pointed to a narrow rooftop line on the feed. "That's your real threat, not the street." They adjusted the camera, found it. A single figure, watching, waiting. "Sniper?" someone asked. Maya shook her head. "Observer, the sniper's further back." She closed her eyes for a second, letting the image settle into her mind the way it used to. Distance, elevation, wind, intent. "Your window is closing," she said. "If you wait too long, you lose them. If you move too fast, you lose civilians." The room was silent again. William stepped forward. "What do you recommend?" The question landed heavier than any order she'd ever received. Maya thought of the mountains, of hesitation, of alignment. "Pull back," she said. "2 blocks, create space. Let them think you've lost nerve. And if they press," someone demanded, "then you'll see who's really in control." It was a gamble, all restraint was. They executed the pullback. Minutes stretched, sweat beaded, someone cursed under their breath. Then movement. The observer shifted. The real threat revealed itself in the distance, repositioning too quickly, too confidently. Maya exhaled slowly. There. They acted not with gunfire but with containment, streets sealed, civilians redirected, the threat neutralized without a shot fired. When it was over, the room didn't erupt in celebration. It sagged in relief. Williams turned to Maya. "You saved lives today." Maya shook her head. "They did," they listened. Hale studied her with something like awe. "You didn't take the shot." Maya met her gaze. "I didn't need to." That was the difference now. Later, alone in the quiet that followed, Maya sat with the weight of it all. She realized something fundamental had shifted. She no longer measured her worth by how precisely she could end a threat. She measured it by how well she could prevent one. The file they updated that night didn't erase her again. It changed her classification, not into something visible, but into something trusted. Back at her desk the next morning, the clipboard felt lighter. The rifle remained untouched. A young officer passed her and nodded, not out of fear, out of understanding. Maya returned the nod. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't hunting either. She was choosing. And in that choice, she finally understood what strength looked like when it wasn't trying to prove itself. Quiet. Measured. Human. Why did the quiet feel earned for the first time in her life? Maya noticed it in the way her morning slowed. Not laziness, intention. The base still woke before dawn, engines humming, boots striking concrete, orders flowing whether anyone was ready or not. But inside her, something had loosened. The constant readiness to react, to disappear or deploy, had softened into awareness instead of tension. She still arrived early, still logged every number with care, still kept her head down when noise offered nothing but distraction, but the difference was subtle and profound. She was no longer bracing. The room they'd used during the last crisis had been sealed again, its screens dark, its urgency archived into reports that would never tell the full story. Officially, nothing remarkable had happened. Unofficially, several people slept better at night because one woman had known when not to act. Maya didn't think of it as restraint anymore. She thought of it as stewardship. Colonel Williams stopped by her workspace less often now, not because he'd lost interest but because he trusted the equilibrium. When he did pass, their exchanges were brief, functional, honest. "You settling in?" he asked once, standing where others pretended not to notice her. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. That answer used to sound like retreat. "And now?" "Now it sounds like ownership." Maya considered that after he left. Ownership had once terrified her. To own something meant responsibility, exposure, risk. But she'd learned that avoiding ownership hadn't freed her from consequence. It had only delayed it. The days blurred together in the way stable days often do. No alarms, no late-night knocks, no codes hidden in plain sight. For the first time in years, Maya let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found the balance point. Then the letter arrived. It wasn't electronic. That alone made her pause. Real paper, hand-delivered, no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single paragraph, typed precise. "Your actions have altered outcomes beyond their immediate scope. This correspondence serves as notice that your discretionary status has been formally reviewed and permanently amended. No further operational requests will be made without your explicit consent. Maya read it twice, then a third time. Consent. The word sat heavily in her mind, not as a victory but as recognition. Someone somewhere had decided she was no longer an asset to be deployed, but a person to be consulted. She folded the letter and placed it in her locker, not as a trophy, as a reminder. That evening, she went to the range alone. The sun was low, painting the desert in amber and shadow. She didn't sign out a rifle. She didn't need to. She stood behind the line and watched others train. Watched impatience creep into their movements. Watched confidence outrun discipline. She recognized herself in them, not as she was now but as she'd been, hungry to prove, certain that action equaled worth. A young woman struggled with her breathing, frustration visible even from a distance. Maya waited until the drill ended before approaching. "May I?" she asked gently. The soldier nodded, surprised. Maya didn't correct her stance right away. She watched her breathe, then spoke quietly. "Slow down," she said. "Accuracy isn't about force, it's about listening." The young woman tried again, improved immediately. "Thank you," she said, eyes wide. Maya smiled faintly. "You already knew how, you just needed permission to trust it." She left before gratitude could turn into questions. Weeks later, Fort Blackstone hosted a small ceremony, not for her, for a unit returning home. Families gathered, children clung to uniforms. Laughter spilled into the open spaces usually reserved for drills and discipline. Maya stood at the edge, unnoticed and content with that. She watched a father kneel to meet his daughter's eyes, watched a woman collapse into someone else's arms, relief overwhelming composure. She didn't know them, they didn't know her. And that was enough. Colonel Williams joined her quietly. "You ever think about what happens next?" Maya considered the question. "Sometimes." "And I think," she said slowly, "that I'll stay where I can do the most good with the least harm." Williams nodded. "That's a rare answer." "It took me a long time to earn it." As the sun set, Maya felt the familiar weight of memory, not as a burden this time but as context. The mountains, the shots, the silence afterward, the years she'd spent trying to outrun herself. She understood now that redemption hadn't come from being needed again. It had come from being trusted to choose. That night she locked her locker and left the base under a sky scattered with indifferent stars. The desert stretched out the way it always had, vast, unjudging, honest. She walked without hurry. Somewhere behind her, the rifle remained locked away. Somewhere ahead, the world continued to need quiet decisions made by steady hands. Maya Rodriguez no longer measured her life by the moments she acted. She measured it by the moments she didn't, and why? Because sometimes, strength isn't found in the shot taken or the command given. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.